Hey everyone, welcome to the Retail Redefined podcast, a podcast where we talk about retail, design, and the future of it. And I'm your host, Chriselle. Today's episode is a fun one, and it's not like pretty much every other episode that has come before this. We are talking about the connection between physical and digital design, and my two guests that I have on today are William Ellsworth, who is a designer here at RDC, and Brian Newman, who is the senior graphic designer up in the marketing department with me. And it was a great conversation to have because these two people are people that I do talk with very regularly about these kinds of issues and topics, to be honest. And it does get a little theoretical and a little bit intense and at times, but all the concepts that we cover in this episode, ranging from gentrification to authenticity and AI and simulations and how all of these things are affecting the way that we design, it's all very relevant, and it's all something that I think we can still take something from it. So, like I said, Will is a designer here and Brian is a graphic designer. So both do similar things, have similar thought processes. It's just that, as you will hear us talk about throughout the episode, it just manifests itself differently. One of them designs things that we see in person and we can walk into and engage with, and the other one designs things that we see on our phones, on our computer screens, and sometimes on the side of buildings as well, depending on, what the project is. So again, I hope you enjoy this week's episode, and here goes. Hey guys, thanks so much for being on the show.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
So we're going to go right into it and talk about you guys as designers. You're both designers, just in different contexts. So we're going to start with a big question. How do you guys approach your design process? And I'm just curious to see if it's any different, because you're designing physical spaces and you're designing for primarily digital, although I know you have been kind of designing more environmental graphics, which is going up in a physical space. So
who wants to start?
Well, she pointed to you first. So she was pointing to Will first when she was talking about designing in the physical, and then me second. So we'll go with Will.
Sure. Okay. So my name's Will, or William, or Ellsworth, or a combination of all three at once.
What about Bill?
No, never Bill. Never Bill. It's the family name, so I'm going to try and break the mold. Anyways, I've been here for about a year, so I started January 15th. I just had my 1 year anniversary, so I'm kind of someone who was raised through kind of the digital revolution in architecture, and that's my big interest. So algorithmic processes, trying to deal with simulation, kind of leaning on the words and work of Greg Lynn, Morphosis, those kind of offices that are really up and coming and trying to be as kind of inventive as possible in the digital realm. So that's kind of where I see myself, and I've always had an interest in fabrication and actually seeing how these complex shapes and complex forms end up becoming realized as a built thing, because in the end we're generating architecture, or things that are similar to architecture, depending on how you want to define that. So that's kind of the realm that I like to exist in, or that I try and practice in.
Fantastic. For me, my training's mostly when I went to school, I went and I studied specifically fine art, so there's a completely different thought process. Even though at the beginning of all fine art journeys, you learn about architecture, because most of the fine art, were built into architecture buildings, and that's most of where a lot of art has started within our history. So most of my training comes from, like most classical artists in the fine art sector, where we look at what's before us and we look at what's going on right now, and we try to interpret it. So when it comes to a design process and for like graphics or branding or any of those types of things, it really kind of comes out of that, where it's not necessarily, you do want to try and create something new, but it's a lot of looking at what's going on around you and trying to interpret it and trying to be, what I was always taught is that, you know, art acts as a mirror to culture and society, and it's like, in a way, it's trying to communicate back by showing it what it is. And so that's where a lot of the start of my designs and the things that I do, it's all based in research, which I'm sure it's the same thing with Will.
Right.
And architecture and all like that. But it's more of, again, when somebody gives me a project, you know, you're trying to figure out, like, you're just doing research up and down everything. You're looking at, if it's like a branding thing, you're trying to understand the history of whatever you're branding. You're trying to see of what people have done before in the past, all those things. So that's really where, like, I think mine's a little bit more, you know, loose, instead of I wouldn't say that I have a particular style, just because I don't think, I mean, my personal professional opinion, you can't be too set on one of those things, so you have to kind of be loose.
Right.
And flexible.
And flexible with that. So it's one of those things where, I mean, there's certain styles obviously that I enjoy and stuff like that. I'm using the word that Will hates absolutely, because he's grinning right now. He hates style. But
not that I hate style. I just think,
well, yes, you're very fashionable.
Style can be explained through era and vernacular.
This has been a long conversation that has been going on for months now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where again, the design process, it's not too dissimilar from Will.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it all starts in every kind of design process. It starts through research. From there, you make informed decisions, and then you have, you know, whoever you're designing for, your clients, you know, you have to bring them in collaboratively to help now figure out where it goes from there.
Yeah. I think historically there's been this kind of idea that architecture is like this guy sitting in a room that just like takes out a scale, draws a line, makes the most immaculate line, and says, like, this is architecture. I had a vision of it, and this is what ended up producing. Like, architecture is actually a lot more nuanced, and it's a multiplicity of things coming together to influence either a building or a culture or whatever you define architecture as. So similar to you with art.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's all art. It's all design.
Mm-hmm.
Just using it's just the tools and the mechanisms that we use. So a lot of the same exact things, because again, I started off in architecture, and then I said nope, and then I quickly changed over to art and design. But I mean, it's still design. You're still designing, you know, it's still a creative process. You're trying to solve complex issues through creative means. It's just how it manifests. Yours manifests in a physical form, which we, you know, live in, which we interact with, and mine, I mean, is more about, you know, connecting on, you know, different levels rather than just like that. Even though, like Chriselle said, that doing, you know, environmental graphics or doing installations of art starts getting exactly into what architecture is.
So, Chriselle, from the outside looking in, what is design to you? Or how would you answer this question? Where would you begin?
Design? Or design in, like, the process?
Yeah.
Or what?
I mean, I guess just the same question you asked us. Because I'm curious, what I like about the way that you set this podcast up is you're someone that doesn't come from the background of architecture. So you have this very...
Nor do I. I mean, slightly.
Technically, because you started in it, but you have this very kind of pure view of it from the outside, and I'm curious what your opinion is.
Like, ooh, you threw me on the spot right there.
It's okay. You can edit it.
No, it's totally fine. No, this is fine. But the way that I view design and like it as a whole, I mean, I guess it's pretty much everything you guys have said. I have kind of dabbled in design, not in graphic or architectural design. I was very interested in fashion design for a long time, and the process is similar it's probably a little bit even more similar to architecture because it also manifests itself in a physical thing.
Right.
And I feel like design is like we live in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's everything. It's this room that we're sitting in. It's this mic that we're recording on. You know, it had to be designed like this, and it kind of just, it's more than just the colors on the wall, like lines. I'm looking at there's artwork in this room and I'm just like looking at it while we're talking. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's kind of how I view it. I view it as something that, it's like when a fish doesn't know that it's wet because it's in water, that's design.
Wait, are we saying now that fish don't know that they're wet?
Yes.
Because I don't want to be a part of that podcast.
Well, that's an interesting point of view too, because that's a very like 21st century, 20th century kind of view of design. That's not the way we felt historically. So Euclid. That's not a good way to continue it. But Euclid was really interested in like primitives and defining what geometry is. And the first, he wrote a book called The 13 Principles, and that kind of goes through what he viewed as geometry. Oh, God. The reason I brought this up is because of your view of the world. What was your view of the world?
Design, that we live in it, that it's everywhere.
Right. Okay. It's a multiplicity of things that come together. Okay. So what Euclid did is he wrote the 13 Principles, and in that book he kind of talks about what we know of geometry as today, or today being the 4th century when he was around. I just looked that up. But during that time, it was just like primitive circles, lines, projection drawings, squares and rectangles, those kind of things. It wasn't like a complex piece of geometry. And that influenced the architecture completely, because architecture was about the monolith and not about the culture that's influencing the monolith. And even recently, Greg Lynn talks about it as like the hull of a boat. And the boat hull needs to be able to take water. It's about buoyancy. It's about wind direction. It's about all these different things happening at once, and it takes one specific form. And that's what we view architecture as today. That's not the way they looked at it back then. So like kind of the big difference between Euclidean geometry and a more nuanced view of architecture. That was it. That's what, the end. That's all I was going to say.
Okay, so having said all of that, and you know, obviously like tech is also influencing architecture, and it's, I mean, my job would not exist because of technology. To an extent,
I mean, you could be running around just telling people about stuff randomly. I mean, I guess that would be social media, like well before social media, right?
Just barking.
Just barking at
just
people.
being social.
Yeah.
Just being social.
Soapbox.
But how do you guys think that design is going to change, you know, as our tech is rapidly expanding and growing? I mean, I like in the news that I'm like keeping up with, I'll just see AI, AR, like everything coming up. And how is that going to be affecting you guys?
Do you want me to take it?
Hot potato? I don't know.
Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, there's not a single industry, I think, that won't be affected by
100%.
AI. I have a friend right now who's at the ports. She works at the ports. And she's constantly posting about how AI is going to take the jobs and all these kind of problems. And it's like, yeah, they are. Like, you're not going to fight this system. You're not going to fight AI by picketing, really.
Well, before you keep going, sorry, since we are talking about physical and digital design, how do you think that it's going to blur the lines, like the digital and the physical world?
Yeah.
I think people are going to get bored with the physical world, because the digital world...
I don't think so. There's a theorist, like, I'm not going to be able to pull it. I don't know who it was, but it's the experience machine, and it was this long paper talking about if you can go into a simulation and be in there for however long you want, you can achieve every kind of pleasure you want in this machine. After 10 years, you're given the option to come out. Would you just stay in the machine and just keep going? And they polled a bunch of people, and the majority of people would not go into the machine. And that's kind of...
But what you're talking about, too, is that you're, like, again, obviously, because they're asking people that aren't in the machine, right?
Right.
And you're also what I'm talking, the reason why I made the statement that I did was because the way that I look at how we're dealing with technology and everything like that. We had talked about this before off podcast air about we live in a physical world. The physical world has limitations. We try and understand what those are. We're trying to like hack into all those things. One of the craziest things that we've done is now with digital age, we've created a whole, again, a simulation, whole thing that doesn't have, like, we can make it whatever it wants to be, right? So you can have, within that realm, anything is possible as long as you set the purviews of what you want it to be, how you want it to react. You can have anything, right? Physical world, you have to deal with, I have to deal with another physical like Chriselle who's telling me that I need to do something and I have to because there's, all these things. Within a simulation, I think we're going to, especially if technology starts really ratcheting up, you're going to get to a point where we're going to be running simulations. I mean, like, you can already see it, right? Everybody complains about that they don't have flying cars, they don't have these things, they don't have all those things. Well, the reason why we don't have those things is because, one, some of them already kind of exist, just not in the way that we think that they do. And two, because of all the things, the limitations within the physical world. There's a reason why you have so many people that are like throwing themselves into digital media, why people, social media, video games and those things. It's because those things are instantly more gratifying early on now. Now, I agree with you there's always going to be, when there's a push towards something, there's going to be a reaction to where it's like, no, and I think that's why you also see nowadays there's more about more push for like hand making stuff, those types of things. There's always that type of thing, when you live in a city, all you can hear about city dwellers saying like, oh God, I just wish that I could go out to the country or get up to the mountains, escape, right? But again, going back to why I think that we're going to long for stuff, and I think I think you see it in science fiction, stuff like The Matrix, stuff like Ready Player One, all these kind of things where people escape into a virtual reality because you can be whatever you want to be in that reality. Okay, we're already experiencing that on social, political levels, trying to figure out who you are. And in that realm, you don't have to be bound by your physical being.
Right.
And, with that...
I mean, that's way off architecture.
I was going to say, how does that affect the physical space? If you think we're going to be living in this completely digital world in a simulation, how is that going to affect?
Well, that's another question. I don't think we're going to be living in that. I think because we're physical beings, we're going to have to inevitably reconcile that whole idea of us living. We're always going to be in a physical space until somehow somebody hooks somebody's brains up and downloads them into a computer. We're in a physical world,
right?
And so we're never going to get past that. That's why I think what you were trying to get at, Will, was even if you're in a simulation, and if you happen to know it's a simulation, there's going to be people that are going to be fine with that. They're going to just absolutely love it because it gives them the opportunity to whatever. But there's always it won't be real.
There's always a pull towards authenticity, and that's kind of that's what this whole thing's about, and that's how people can even argue gentrification in a way. Because as cities change, you become more, as it becomes cheaper for whatever reason, lower income people live there, then artists go there, and then it becomes this really authentic place full of like true power, like pure authenticity. And as a result, people want to move there and capitalize off it and all that kind of stuff. And that's like the big problem with gentrification is they are very authentic. People want that authenticity. Same thing with the digital realm. Because you see that like in...
Well, same thing with design too. We're going back to it. People, again, those are why certain brands do well. It's because there's an authenticity to them.
Well, define authenticity. What do you mean by that?
Kind of a trueness, I guess. Like a validity to something's existence, I guess. So,
in the context of artists, this is not really related to exactly what we're talking about, but
okay.
I'm just curious, in reference to the artists, what would make artists authentic and not in comparison to...
Like an artist authentic? What would make an artist
in comparison to lower income people living in a city?
No, I'm saying the people that are lower income are authentic. They're the ones that have like...
Yeah, because that's the whole idea is that you have this, say, district within a city, it's it doesn't it's not given the opportunities as say others. So just naturally people like, and we'll use the quote unquote the artists go in there, they kind of, because they can afford it, because they're inevitably creative, they give this kind of unique quote unquote authentic vibe to the whole thing. Then you get like,
it's not the art. I don't think the artist is creating the authenticity. I think it's the existing culture is what is authentic. That's what artists kind of like to go towards.
Yeah, they go to that.
It's cheap. They can live there. And then with that comes a cool place, and then the coffee houses start coming in, or the ramen places, and all. And then
maker spaces, right, all those things.
The process of gentrification is because this place has authenticity.
And then you'll have big business come in and say, "Hey, everybody really loves this. Let's create like high-end condos right across from this really authentic place, so that people who want to come in, that come from like better parts, that they can come in and tap into that."
It's a layering of culture and history and all these kind of things compounding on top of each other that is, I think, what we're defining as like authenticity. You don't get that in suburbia, where it's just tract houses that were built. There's a huge amount of land that's given to people that can afford it, because we need housing, so here's a bunch of housing.
Or they're also trying to replicate what's already been done,
the American dream,
in those things. So it's, again, that's where like, again, when it comes to design, or the way that I look at it when it comes from a design process is like, you're being authentic. You're not bringing anything more or less than what it needs to be. Like if if we're designing a car or a building, you're not adding anything more or less to it, and then that's what you need it to be.
True, very true.
So we've kind of veered off a little bit, and we're talking about authenticity, but I just wanted to kind of get that clarification. But now that you've explained it a little bit more, it makes a little bit more sense.
Well, let's try and start talking about fabrication. We're talking about authenticity.
Yeah.
How does the digital play with fabrication, authenticity of it? What's the connection now in our world right now between?
How can we remain authentic as designers? Well, I guess how can you guys remain authentic as designers in the wake of all of these things happening out externally?
Yeah. That's brilliant question. That's what people have been trying to solve ever since the beginning.
Yeah, since the beginning of time.
It's kind of like
it's just a creative issue to begin with, because everything that informs you creatively, creative wise, we're human. We're influenced by everything. I go out and I see Star Wars, like that's going to affect what I design, right? And so immediately somebody's going to look at you and say like, oh, well, you're just copying Star Wars, right?
But architects purely, and this is kind of back to that last, like architects purely work in simulation. Architects don't build, architects draw. So all we do is simulate. There's a lot of knowledge that goes into that, because you have to know how materials work together and all these kind of things. But like at the end of the day, architects typically just draw. And over the years, as architects have kind of, or I guess as litigation and other things have gotten involved within architecture, there's been a greater degree of trying to push things off to subcontractors. That way you can limit your own liability. But design intent is linked directly to your own skin in the game, I would argue. So like for me, being interested in digital fabrication is a way for the architect to not relinquish that design intent and actually carry it through the entire process. It's the way to literally bridge the gap between a digital simulated model and what's eventually going to be built, when you're the one designing the process to actually make it.
So that's like the modeling that you do in the office.
We don't do it much. I wish we did it more. I mean, I definitely want to pursue it more in the office, and I think it'd be great if clients were more interested in the process. It takes a lot of experimentation, which tend to be expensive. That's why it's important to team up with makerspaces that have these processes figured out, and to really understand the entire process of making something. Because that's what sets us apart. If we're going to be a design office, we need to be inventive and innovative with the way things are put together. And the only way to do that is to really get dirty and like get your hands messy and make stuff and experiment. And in that process, you can generate things that have never been done before, and that begins to push and steer the direction of the discourse, which is important as a design office to do that.
Yeah.
I agree. With everything.
Well, I guess for you work, so Will is talking more about, I mean, yes, we're talking about the digital, but then you're also talking about like physically creating something.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that different for you?
I mean, it's not different. It's just how, again, like how we started.
How it manifests itself?
It's how it manifests itself. You know, again, for me, it's the same process. You're working with, again, I think all of us as creators, you know, there used to be a time where we were all in the same space together, right? And we all used to do stuff at the, you know, and we'd all kind of just work to solve creative issues. Now that we've gotten so specialized, because I think we've gotten so good at defining roles and particular things, to Will's point, I think he says, you know, I can understand like the pure political and legality of certain things to be able to help with that. But I also think too, it's just because, again, as humans, we get really good with our systems. We get really clever with them. And I think we can become incredibly efficient where, hey, Will, you're wood guy, and Chriselle, you do steel type of a thing. And because you already have everything you already need to know about that, I can come as a client, I say, I need this, I go to you, you work on something for like 2 weeks, you get really good at that. So I think when it comes to fabrication and stuff like that, and just design, how it manifests itself, and how, you know, we're all just subcontracting everything out. For me, it's not too dissimilar. It's, you know, somebody has to start off with the design, the idea, and then you go either, you know, you go out and you find somebody who can help manufacture it. So for like, you know, we do that all the time with environmental graphics. You know, we put it out to bid. Right?
I was actually going to ask you about that.
We put it out to bid. You know, I sit down with clients. We figure out exactly what they need. You know, you go through the collaboration of like what's, you know, when you go through, you know, what we can accomplish, what we can't, what's the right, and what's the best practices for these types of things, of, you know, depending on what the goals of the project are, of the client are. And then from there, you know, you work with, you know, other signage groups and other, you know, contractors that can help. You know, if we have this bold idea to do this kind of expression through metal and stuff, well, we're going to go to a group that already has that we know that is going to be able to deliver that. I think with what Will was trying to say is that through modeling through these digital formats, there's no like kind of guessing work that has to be done, because we're going to all share the same language, right? Ideally, they would maybe understand the modeling, and you can just give a model, they can see that, they can express it the way that they need to. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's where, again, you get back to that original idea, and it doesn't somehow get lost around the way, because we're using that information.
By passing off that way, you're losing intent, because they might do it a different way. They might fabricate something. If you tell someone to take an I-beam and weld like an angle iron on it, the angle that they weld it on and all those kind of things, like if it's not shown in the drawings, they're going to try and figure it out, or they're going to do something, or they're going to issue an RFI or whatever. And to actually know the process of welding, you can then influence those drawings that much more, and your intent is followed through. Mm-hmm. So that's where like we have for years been the T method, which is like knowing a lot on top, but then really being able to project a lot of knowledge in one direction. Mm-hmm. I think we've become incredibly efficient because of that, but design has lost a lot. Design has taken the biggest hit as a result, because we don't know the other parts. We're relying on other people now, and that intent has been relegated to other people. That's kind of my big problem with it, is with the T understanding of anything.
But then you'd have to find people that are willing to, because again, with that, the other way it's efficient, we're able to do a lot more in a short time. That's why we've been able to, you know, kick the spurs, as it were, to growth in certain things. That's why I said, like, we've become really good and efficient with that. You just see it how, right. You know, even though humans necessarily don't thrive or creativity doesn't thrive. Again, it's like the factory line, right? You each have like a role and you do it. It's not very, artists and creative types, and pretty much that's all humans.
Right.
Don't thrive in that. That's again when coming back to like AI and technology, a lot of the jobs like that will go the way of the dinosaur, the dodo, all those things, because you don't have to worry about those things, and then it should hopefully free up. But again, it's one of those things. Now when it comes to design and stuff like that, I guess you say that it influences that. I guess it just comes back to what's the true design intent. If the final goal is a certain object, and how the little miniature, welding, how that all kind of manifests itself is of no consequence. You're just trying to get to that final overall form.
So this, I guess, goes back to the discussion of intensive versus extensive, because the whole it's just a postulation, because it is like a big problem. So it's going to take forever to define, but
Of course.
intensive is they're both values. An intensive value versus an extensive value. An intensive value is something that doesn't have a numerical way to quantify it. So like if you put pressure on something, there's pressure moving through, there's forces. These forces we can understand up to a certain decimal point, but we're never going to actually reach that decimal point. We're just going to rationalize it. Unlike an extensive number, which is a numerical value we can calculate and get to. A computer is made extensively. So because of that, it'll never be able to simulate the real world perfectly. It's just a postulation of intent. So if you're taking, like you're saying, welding, or you're taking some kind of process, like sure, you can design it up to a certain point, but if you want to be really thorough in your design and go all the way through and have 100% design intent, you're not going to be able to.
Of course. But it's also one of those things too where, again, and I think it's always something that you have to. We were talking about digital and physical and all these things. It's why I come back to why everything has to be built in the physical world at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you get to that, what happens in the physical world? You're saying that you get rid of your design intent, but then you're going to have all these other forces that are pushing you towards efficiency. It's not efficient for you, Will, to build your own house and have exactly every little detail. Mm-hmm. Because what you're going to do is you're going to be, for a few years, you're going to be sleeping outside, right? So, it's what's funny about design school, and it even more interesting about architecture. Like you say, you guys just mostly design in simulation. Mm-hmm. Like, how many architects would you say have actually built their own, even their own house, let alone the projects that they do?
Very few.
Exactly.
But the ones that do tend to be the ones that have these incredible designs, and they have as much intent as possible. Like Glenn Murcutt. Glenn Murcutt is an architect in Australia who won the Pritzker Prize, so huge award. He hand draws everything, and then makes it. Doesn't use a computer, he's all about pure intent. And his projects follow that. And it's super interesting. Same with Tom Main, same with all these kind of people that are makers and at their core are makers.
But see, then what I would just challenge that is that within a digital, with all the technology, it just needs to be, again, I think we're all running towards this idea that it's going to be salvation for us because of the technology, AI, it's going to, give us more knowledge than we can ever hope to have. But it's just a tool. I mean, at least, especially at this point, mm-hmm. For digital fabrication or any of those types of things, when you're getting into it, it's like anything else. When we're talking about all the things that we do in digital and physical, like Will's talked about, the tools are only as good as the operator. A lot of times where it's like, hey, we'll design something out, pick the ideal situation for it to, operate in, so we know exactly what it's going to look like. But then something happens that we didn't think of at the time. Well, the system was already flawed because we didn't have that, so we have to go back, add that into the system. So that's where I'm saying for you, where, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Okay,
cool.
Well, I gotta check his name, but Maurice Conti. I don't know how to say his last name. Conti. He has a TED talk about this exact, like the next phase of architecture and the next phase of design being accompanied with AI and how that works. Because I don't know if you guys are familiar with AlphaGo. Ever heard of AlphaGo at all?
No.
Okay, it was a computer program that was made to beat Go. The best way to test AI that they've always kind of, for the last 10 years, they've been trying to do is trying board games, card games, something that's a controlled environment, and then they make an algorithm that'll try and solve the problem. So there's all these games they've tested, and there was one game that AI scripters couldn't beat, which is Go. And Go is it's like Chinese checkers, kind of in the same way. It's all these little stones, black and white stones, on a 19 by 19 grid. There's more possible combinations on the grid than there are atoms in the universe. So
Wow.
the brute force system of calculating, which is literally just like multiplying this by this, creating a fitness landscape, and then running some algorithms to try and find the best possible answer, that won't work. Because you'd have to multiply all the atoms in the universe by all the atoms in the universe, and then once you get that number, that's how many possible game types there are, and then you can make your choice on what stone to play next. So they had to make this. They had to make this program called AlphaGo, which uses neural networks and neural pathways and all this kind of parametric algorithmic stuff to beat a human player, and it worked. And they wrote this, so it changed the way you look at algorithms, and it actually models it based off a brain, more or less, because we have neural pathways that make us think in different dimensions. When we apply this to architecture, what Maurice is saying is we're going to be at the point where we just take our parameters, plug it into a computer, and then it'll give us some options. And then we can say, I don't know if that really works for this. Maybe this will work. And we start having this relationship with a computer that's more of a peer-to-peer relationship over a tool. And that's going to be the biggest shift of the 21st century, is thinking about the computer not as a tool, but as an actual peer. And that's what's kind of frightening.
That is scary.
Well, and not only that, you're talking about, like, because again, with the design process that we've all talked about, it's all about this collective with, it's collaboration with society, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can design the perfect quote unquote house, and it's absolutely perfect for what a human adult needs within a structure and all those things. Doesn't really leave much space for, hey, how I feel or how you feel or your expressions of, of style or whatever you want it to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, so you're just saying, like, you're putting it in an algorithm, it's going to pick the most efficient. That's not necessarily, even though we just got done talking about, humans are pretty efficient. We're efficient when it comes to certain random tasks, right? Or tasks that keep...
Novelty. We're really good at novelty.
Yeah.
We're horrible at repetitive tasks.
Yeah. We want to get rid of the repetitive tasks, and that's what I think that's where, again, that's the big scary thing with AI and stuff like that, is because, again, we want it to live in its realm.
Mm-hmm.
The other realm that we like to operate in is, again, like what we were talking about. We like to be the creative. We like having, even if it's slightly messy, we like the option of all those different things. So that's where that'll be interesting with that. But again, it also argues up to a point. We're reaching towards an ultimate ending with technology. We're always going to want it to be a tool. We're not going to want it to be a peer.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it becomes a peer, then it also opens the possibility that it can surpass us.
Which is the fear.
That's
Yes.
the fear.
That's the current fear. So that's
Yes.
There's another good book called What to Think About Machines That Think, and the whole beginning is like this preamble that talks about a group of birds, and these birds find an egg, and as the reader, it's an owl egg, and these birds are like, oh, we got to try and hatch this thing and figure out how it works. So 2 birds fly off and go try and figure that out. 2 other birds go and try and find it at home. All these birds are kind of like scrambling around to hatch this egg. They have no idea what they're going to unlock the second they hatch it. And that's kind of where we're at right now with AI. And that's the big kind of discourse with AI is, cool, it can do this, it can do this, it can do this. But like no one's really talking about what this thing can really do because we don't know.
Well, because again, that's again the creative. We're not very, very good at that either. Trying to figure out, like, we're not very good at, like, should we be doing it? It's more of we want to do it because we want to understand things, right? And so again, most people are thinking when they're going to unlock it that it's just going to be, we went from like a screwdriver to a power drill, right? It's still a tool, but now this thing's on steroids.
Yeah, way more efficient.
Way more efficient, way more, we have more time for our personal gains of like, we get to play and do all that stuff. Again, figuring out all the logistical aspects of architecture or urban planning or what I do, like what's the best, choices for these brands and all these other things like that. If we can just skip ahead right to like all the impressive stuff that we care about, then, that's what we're looking for.
But I think the fear of seeing AI as like this thing that's going to destroy all of us and put all of us out of work and all that kind of stuff, it's definitely going to put a lot of people out of work.
I mean, that's what technology's always done over the years.
Yeah, like scribes were protesting when the printing press came out. Like it's just part of evolution and progression. We're in a progressive society.
Well, but also with new technology, we could create new jobs.
Right, exactly. But AlphaGo was made to play the game. If you try and take AlphaGo down to the ports and like figure out how to move shipping containers, it won't do that. Like you're still designing the algorithm to do its job, which is to think or to do whatever. We're not at a point where an algorithm is writing algorithms to figure other stuff out.
So it's very narrow.
Yeah.
It's very narrow.
Yeah.
But then the fear is that when we just write an algorithm to write other algorithms, and then that's when it becomes like us.
Yeah, but will that happen? I mean, I don't know. Who knows? It hasn't been successful yet.
Of course.
Even the Facebook thing or the Twitter bot that was like coming up with its own language and then talking to other people and all this kind of like, it's all it was doing was language. It wasn't like operating with gun or anything. It's not.
Wow, straight to the gun, Will.
Well, it's people fear. Like, look at the Matrix. Look at these things.
That was turning us into human batteries. It has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Which, by the way, we're terribly inefficient as batteries.
It's true. We use a lot of.
It's the
we
worst.
use a lot of
It's
electricity.
one of the worst applications of a human possible. So, bring us back on track here, Chris.
What's next?
What's next?
Well,
Otherwise, we're going to start rambling.
I mean, I'm just like listening and nodding my head because I agree. I agree with you guys. And I don't know, just the idea of thinking about how, like, what's the next, like, thinking about the next step, kind of how you briefly mentioned earlier, the evolution in how we think about design, and then even thinking about how we actually design, going from like paper, going to the digital, the computer, and then now AI is going to change how we design. And
But I mean, is it really?
I
mean,
don't
like,
it's going to change the
I mean,
process for sure.
we
it's
have-
changing the process and it's making things more efficient, but like, yes, we're still drawing.
Yeah,
I mean, at the
I mean,
very
like that was
core.
the main thing that going through school was the very first thing. It's like, oh, you can use your fancy computers, but it's just like, it all starts. I mean, it's also even before you get to a piece of paper. Like how many? I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure it's like everybody else, where, you're thinking about a design process on your drive home, right? You're
Right.
thinking before you're even sketching it out, right?
Right.
So again, that's what I'm saying is that it's just a tool, and we're just getting more and more efficient with our tools.
Mm-hmm. But we are at a point now where we can write code that begins to generate the design, and that code, it's still your design, still design intent. Like the argument that people made in the 90s about using a computer, they're like, just because you're using a computer now, they think the computer is the author. It's like, no, you're still the one controlling it. Like authorship is still goes back to the human. Same thing with data. You're still writing the code. It's still your authorship. Just you're using it as a tool. The scary thing is what we're talking about, which is when AI begins to
Author itself.
Yeah.
author itself.
Yeah, that's
Which-
what I was.
But that's the fear. If we just like don't have that fear and think of it as a tool, that's going to be the biggest shift from the 20th to the 21st century, or 21st to 22nd, or whatever.
Utilizing AI as a tool,
Mhm.
or the mindset that it is a tool
Well,
and not.
I'm sorry, not it's a tool. It's that it's a peer
Hmm.
to respect it in a way. And then,
But then it's going to want benefits.
I don't think so.
and then it's going to
It
want
doesn't want
brakes.
healthcare. It's not gonna want
It's
brakes.
going to want brakes.
It wants to fulfill more processes. And Bitcoin. I think it wants a lot of Bitcoin.
I guess it also just depends on if you also think that it's going to have the processes that it wants to. I mean, because again, now we're getting into science fiction, right? Which is like
Whole
other thing. But the whole idea is that again, it's the idea of we create it because again, we're thinking of it, like you said, we're thinking of it as a tool. We need to think of it as a peer. But because we're thinking of it as a tool, it's like we're looking for efficiencies, and because humans aren't efficient. I mean, as we've discussed before, it's going to see what we do, and it's going to be like, okay, well, you guys can't be in charge of anything. So
why would it make that logical leap?
Why?
Yeah.
Because
I don't think it would.
I think it's just the general fear of it, because again, it's the idea of because we think we're uniquely special, and we go, because it's what it means to be humans. That's the idea. You look at countless writings on it and everything, is the idea that you build an AI to basically, let's just say, build out cities, right? Because we'll try and keep it within the architecture realm, right? It's going to find the most efficient way of building it. We had talked about when it came to, we can already build an efficient house, right? If we set the parameters. Problem is that there's so many of us and everybody has different set parameters, right? Now, if we could get everybody in the room together and say, these are the exact parameters that, however you want to measure it, well, we algorithm that into an AI. The AI will build it all out. Everybody's immediately going to have a problem with it.
Is it like what you were saying earlier, that just because it's the most efficient doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be?
It lacks heart, is what
Yeah.
is what most people would say. It lacks heart
Authenticity
and authenticity.
is what it lacks. And
Right.
exactly. That's why the experience machine doesn't work.
And so it lacks that. But again, what we were saying about the simulation is that if we were my argument was, if we're controlling the simulation and we bring in that kind of just mess up kind of nature to it, and it was just
The degree of mutation, I guess.
yeah, then I don't think people have an issue with it.
Mhm.
You look at it like video games and video game culture. Okay, video games and movies and stuff, they're already doing what they do. They use the exact same stuff that architects use every single day. They're using it to a crazy extent where they're building environments and doing that, but it's all digitally. It doesn't exist outside of a digital realm. And there's plenty of people that just will just hurry up to get back home to be in that simulation.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm saying is that they're actively choosing that simulation, and that simulation, they themselves also possess some authorship. The big scary thing about AI is that they'll lose authorship. They'll be dictated to because of the tool trying to be efficient, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think it works in those simulations, though? Because, people choosing to be in that world, I don't know. I'm just kind of, I don't even know if that makes sense. But
I forget the name for it. It was on Vice last night, but it was talking about, in Japan, they're having a big problem. There's a whole culture of people that
Or hermits?
hermits, yeah. But there's a name for it.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I also don't know the name for it.
But
Because again, what it would also think about it in a weird way, because again, if we, let's say, quote unquote, abandon the physical, right? And we decide to go into digital because we see so much more opportunity, right? Because it's whatever we make it to be.
But what is opportunity? Like instant gratification?
Instant
Instant
gratification, and
that's-
it's a way of, I think. I mean, even though I know, because again, to run the simulation, it's still going to have to operate in the real world,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's even if it's computers, it's got to be plugged in somewhere. Some people are going to have more money, more ability to do all like that. But it's also one of those things where people would argue that if you're able, I mean, it would just be, ultimately how I feel is that it would just be replacing what we already have. It's just that now we can do kind of things that are maybe, say,
defying gravity.
yeah, you unlock the physical kind of ceilings of different things, right? But we're gonna bring it's like anything else. It's I forget what it was. There was it was in science fiction where this one group, they basically left the planet and they went to a new planet, And one of the great quotes of it was, and I forget the book, I feel sorry for whoever the author was, but one of the great quotes of the book was, it's like they went and they discovered a new world, and it's this idea, we're going to create a new world. And when they got when this one group, they went there and people were already there and they were talking to this guy that was already there. He goes, yeah, it's a new world, same people though. So the same problems exist. That's why I'm saying it's simulation, because again, it's just that, yeah, certain more, you said instant gratification, those certain things will entice enough people, because again, maybe you're socially awkward, you feel a little bit better, you're able to have the car that you want because it's easily manufactured within a simulation than it is in the physical world. Because the physical tools and those things cost more and you don't do that, but you make enough in the that's the whole premise of a lot of different things.
Have either of you seen the Black Mirror episode San Junipero? That's all I've been thinking about while you were talking. And it's literally about these two women. In real life, they are, and you don't find this part out until the very end, but in real life, they are...
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert!
Spoiler
So sorry.
alert.
If you have not watched the Black Mirror episode San Junipero...
Wait, when did it come out?
Like 2016, 2017?
Okay, then no spoilers. You're fine, people. If it's been past a year, you're on your own.
But the premise is that in real life, these two women are, like, they're older, so they're, their physical body is more or less dead. They're vegetables, and they've uploaded their brain into a server, and because they've uploaded their brain into a server, they are able to live in this simulated world. And these two people I don't think they knew each other in real life. I can't remember, but they met each other in this simulated world. And you only can do it, like, if you want your physical body to still be like alive, like if you want to be able to open your eyes again, you can only do it for like a certain amount of hours. But once you permanently upload your brain into the server, then you're essentially dead.
You're digital matter.
And
your information at that point.
That's kind of like what that whole episode explores, is them, living in this world, and they are, and for them it's different because they're older, and in this digital world they're young again, they're in their 20s again.
Well, because again, at that point you're just information, and it's just like anything with code, it's just switching a few numbers.
Yeah, so that's all I've been thinking about while you were talking about that whole simulation.
And as long as we control that simulation, that's why I feel comfortable saying that I think people would abandon real life, just because we're showing that. That's kind of like a weird thing now that's kind of happening, right? I mean, it's even just like, it's the idea of the context of friends and like Facebook, right? I remember going through school and people saying like, how many Facebook friends do you have? Well, be like, oh, I have so many.
Yeah, like why aren't you on my top 8 on MySpace?
How many of them do you actually hang out with? Oh, well, like 3. So you have 3 friends is what you're telling me, right? It's the same thing, but people get invested with that. I mean, like, you have followers, you have all these things. I think people will abandon that, and they'll go into those realms. And it's interesting when it comes just to, ultimately, I think, though, everything has to, at some point, the light still has to, like, be turned on, right? At least in my, like, primitive way of looking at things. So we'll never be able to break the shackles of being in a physical realm. I just think, again, it's just going to be like this theoretical place to, like, vacation to.
So in theory, let's say everyone in the world decided to abandon the physical world to get into this digital world. In theory, not everyone will be able to make it, because there still has to be someone to, I guess, activate
and also
it on this side.
if you're also, again, we're getting back into the physical limitations, we're still going to have the same problems where, again, certain people aren't going to be allowed to go in there because they're not going to have access to it. Right now, we're really good at, like, everybody can have access to certain things as long as you're willing, if you can pay for it. Anybody can be an architect because they can easily get the programs, the computers, that type of collection of knowledge. You don't even technically, I mean, yes, you need to go to school, but you don't really need to.
I don't
right?
think you do.
Well, you don't.
I think,
well,
yeah.
everything today now, again, you can do. I mean, that's the whole big thing coming out of universities right
Mm-hmm.
now is that, you know, it's kind of this archaic way of viewing, like, you know, the internet has like been the game changer for everything because you have access to so much information, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you like, you know, we're walking. If everybody has like a smartphone, you're basically walking around with the world's powerfulest like encyclopedia.
Yeah.
You can easily learn how to be anything overnight as long as you're willing to mine that information, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but again, to have access to it, right? There is still some limit, even though, and again, technology is scalable and stuff like that. So once we get really good at having that technology, it scales down so that you can avoid it. So that you can, so it can be affordable, so more and more people can gain access to it. But especially for something like that, to begin with, what you're talking about, Chriselle, one, there'll never be a world where we all abandon it and go to it, right? It's going to be like, and again, you're using a Netflix thing, it's like Westworld, right? It's going to be available, especially early on, to the super elite. And then from there, once it gets scalable, it'll be affordable to everybody. But, you know, it's going to be one of those things. You're going to get some people, like anything else, take it too seriously, get lost in it. There's other people that are going to be like, I'm never going to go there because I want authenticity, and that's not authentic, to borrow Will's phrase.
Hey, that's okay. I stole it anyway, so.
That's fine. I mean, it's an artist community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, but to probably go off what your question was going to be, what does that necessarily mean as far as like design? Well, I mean, we're already doing that. We're doing it in video games. You know, it's like I just got done saying, not to downgrade, but, you know, architecture is a profession, but video game designers, movie people, movie 3D animators, they use the exact same tools that architects use.
Right.
Will's talking about working on simulation. They're working on creating digital worlds, right? The only difference is
We do the same thing that game designers do.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
But with the end idea of not rendering it out so that somebody can play it, it's okay. Now we're going to make it.
The drawings
something
aren't
that we
the
see
final
in front of
product.
us.
Yeah. And so so design's still going to be the same. No matter, again, it's always going to probably be the exact same. Something that I couldn't even imagine what it would be would have to occur for it not to change the design process. It's always going to be, we're going to be influenced by other people that we see, all those things. It comes back to what I talked about with my my history and background of when it came to, fine art. It's always going to be reflecting of one another. We're going to see something, we're going to want to improve it, make it better, make it cooler, make it, however you want to do that. Same thing with Will. He, even though it's based within mathematics, that's coming from something that imprinted on him as within society and stuff, and that he saw, and it resonated with him.
What, mathematics?
Yeah.
Oh, just everything is math.
Well, everything is math.
It's all math.
Everything is math.
It's all numerical.
And it's the digital language, right?
Yeah. What's next, Chriselle?
Authenticity.
Authenticity.
So that's honestly
Buzzwords.
I'm thinking kind of just, I feel like to sum up this entire thing, I feel like more or less it boils down to authenticity. Digital.
Which is it's a very great way of talking with digital and physical, because most people would say, well, the physical is authentic, right?
And I mean, it makes sense. It is something that you do hear thrown out a lot nowadays. People want something real. They want something honest, and I mean, it's true in design as well. So that's what I got from this.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like everything, it's a balance. You need both. You can't have one. You can't have Democrats without Republicans. You can't have.
And there we go.
Well, you can't.
Let's just end on that.
Everything needs its opposite,
of course,
to exist.
And
that's
that's
why they say
you,
opposites attract.
That's why you need the physical. That's why you need the hypothetical.
Right.
Because you can't inform the physical without the hypothetical. The hypothetical can't be informed without the physical, right? It's what we all work in.
In this case, it doesn't exist without the physical.
And again, to also wrap up the reason why you see so many people going to trying to gain authenticity is because, again, in the past, 10 years with the whole social media and all digital kind of revolution and everything, we as a culture, as trying to be that mirror back, it's easily, you can see we've all thrown ourselves 100% into that.
Yeah.
And then we're not finding the answers because guess what? It's still us that's dealing with these things. It hasn't become AI where it's appeared to us.
Mm-hmm.
It's still the same issues that we're having to deal with. So we're not getting that fulfillment that we thought it was. We're coming back into the realization of, wait, it's just another thing. It's just the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you guys for this conversation. It was a roller coaster to say the least, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thanks
Lots
for
of
having us.
things to think about, for sure.
This is my thought process. It just goes all
Yes,
over the place.
it's just,
Just in the head.
that's how we all think, isn't it?
Mhm.
So, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and I hope it was at the very least entertaining to you, but I had a lot of fun recording it, and we definitely explored a lot of big ideas, and this particular episode was definitely not meant to solve any specific problem, but it was really just meant to start a conversation. And for you listening, I hope that it at least gets you thinking even a little bit about how, our physical and digital lives intersect and intertwine in so many different ways, and how, the rise of AI and other technologies is only going to blur those lines even more. Like we were saying, it is a little scary, but then again, there are a lot of things that we were scared of once in society, and we have since come to embrace it all. So anyway, that's all we have for this week. I will talk to you all soon.